Weigl provides full setup, diagnostic, and debug utilities cross-platform and free of charge with Weigl Hardware Configurator. This tutorial explores setup of a new or existing Weigl device from any Mac or PC. We recommend this video as your starting point with the Weigl ecosystem.
Setting up your Pro Commander or Pro I/O device is just a few simple steps on either a Mac, PC, or iOS device. Today we're going to be looking at Weigl Hardware Configurator 1.21 for PC. Double-click on the application, and the first time you may be prompted to disable a firewall or to look at your wireless configuration settings. After you've ran this more than once, this is the default screen that your program will launch to. We have three ways of connecting to the Pro Commander or Pro I/O device. The easiest and recommended is to use a network adapter, which, if your machine has multiple network adapters, make sure you select the one in the subnet range of your device. This means that if my Pro Commander is 10.00.101, my computer should be 10.00. something. In this case, my machine is 10.00.110. We can also connect over serial or USB. This would be the mini USB jack on the front of a Pro Commander or Pro I/O Generation 2 device, or a traditional RS-232 port on a WEMC or other legacy device. Finally, we can also force an IP address within the same subnet range by typing in the MAC address on the bottom of the device or on the side of your box. You can then force a different subnet range of IP and, of course, a gateway mask. For example, if my machine was set to 192.168 and I was unable to change either my device or my computer, I could force my Pro Commander to change its device based solely on the MAC address. Of course, you can always set the IP address directly on the front of the unit using the joystick on the following Pro Commanders. This allows you to set both the IP, subnet, and ports without using a computer whatsoever. Once again, because I do have a network adapter in the same range as my Pro Commander device, I'm going to just go ahead and hit Scan Device. Now note that if your network does not allow broadcast messaging, I can still hit Scan Device, it just takes a little bit longer. In any case, once my Pro Commander is no longer grayed out, I should double-click on that device and be prompted with a window that looks like this. Note that each individual device has a specific window for configuration. Your Pro Commander will say LX, PHX, ES, Pro I/O may say DMX, digital analog. Whatever the device is will show up here with the correct annotation. On the right-hand side, I can immediately click Info and see all the information regarding my Pro Commander device. On the left-hand side, I'm taken immediately to the Hardware Network Device tab, which allows me to change my IP address, subnet mask, or any of my ports. We do highly recommend leaving Pro Commander set to port 5555 and Pro I/Os set to 5559. The other two ports are set for your user configuration, but we do recommend remembering these defaults. Also, you can check the software or hardware version if prompted by support, and connect the daisy chain devices through the WEMNet or legacy serial port connections. For example, as we'll talk about later, if I had three Pro I/O devices that were all factory new, those would default to the baud rate of 9600. By selecting the front and 125, I've now set that daisy chain baud rate to 125 across all devices. Please note that this only works if you have factory fresh devices from Weigl. Here we can also reboot, update our firmware, or restore to factory defaults. Please note that restoring factory defaults does not affect firmware or other parameters within the device. Alternatively, updating the firmware does not necessarily restore factory defaults or change any settings on your device. Let's take a look right now at updating the firmware. We always recommend, unless specifically advised by a Weigl tech support representative, that you are currently running the latest firmware. If I navigate to faq.weigl.support, I'm taken to a page that looks similar to this. Clicking on Solutions and going over to the Hardware Firmware Update will allow me to navigate to my device and the latest firmware. For Pro Commander 2, which is what this video is referring to, we'll note that the latest version is 2.82. Once I've downloaded that firmware, I will have a folder that looks like this in every case. A bundled version of the Weigl Hardware Configurator, a version log, and most importantly, the firmware version itself, located as a hex file, will be in this folder. Other information regarding DFU restores, USB updates, and additional tools for disaster recovery are included in every download. However, assuming everything on my Pro Commander or Pro I/O is working as it should be, and all I need to do is update the firmware, I shouldn't need any of those other tools. To update that firmware, I'll simply hit the firmware update. I'll select the file. I'll navigate to my desktop or wherever the file is located and go under the Pro Commander or Pro I/O device. Now for this example, I've enabled us to see all of the different files that are within that folder, but in most cases, Windows will filter so that you can only select the correct file for your device. In this case, of all these files, I want to pick the Pro Commander 2 version 2.82.hex and hit open. That will populate in here, and note that it should match. Make sure, again, the filter should catch this, but make sure that Procom 2, Pro Commander, okay, all looks good. And I'll hit the begin update, and it will attempt to update the firmware. Note that it will try first to update over TCP/IP, and that update with verification should take about a minute or less. In this case, we've actually forced it to fall back to UDP as it's doing right now. And note that UDP will take a little bit longer as there is more overhead and required checking in the background. If both of these fail and you cannot make a connection that is stable enough to do the firmware over TCP or UDP, you will have to revert to a USB DFU update. And we skipped ahead here just to keep things moving. After it successfully loads the firmware prior to applying it, it will verify the update to make sure that everything does check out. That's what's happening right here. And again, if it was on TCP, this would all fly by in about a minute or less. UDP will be slower, but it should still complete as we would expect. And the firmware update completed successfully. Should this fail for any reason, please make sure to follow the instructions very carefully. It will normally say wait for restart on the display of the Pro Commander, and it may prompt you on the screen here to either restart configurator or to wait for this update or reboot process to complete. Once I'm done with that, I'll hit OK. I'll clear the log and hit info, and now you'll see we have 2.82 for the software version. Let me go ahead and set this back to 9600. Please also notice here that we have something called AAC disabled listed now in this newer firmware version. We began enabling AAC in versions 2.70 and newer, and with that AAC, every upgrade is free, but you will have to call and give us the MAC address to enable your AAC for licensing reasons. Please do make sure that AAC is enabled and that you use it with programs such as Conductor and ShowForge where possible. Under the Audio tab, I've got settings for the master volume, the master bass, the master treble, and of course the amplifier gain. The amplifier gain will circumvent the compression and settings for quality of audio, so please note this is based solely on volume itself. Under serial ports, let me actually stretch out this window a little bit. So under serial ports, I've got configuration settings for baud rate and driver modes. The driver modes are very unique to Weigl devices in that you can load a motor-specific driver to convert analog signals to motor messaging, or you can select an auto configuration for either the Weigl Prism Tag targeting system or other generic RS-485 devices. We currently have over 20 individual driver modes that can be used on any of the Pro Commander devices from the Pro Commander 2 or better. However, some of them do require license code and or prior authorization. Next, on the Variables tab, this gives us a monitoring ability for all 250 variables on a Pro Commander or Pro I/O device. Here, I can either monitor the variables, display their value as hex, or allow the ability to label these numeric values as real-world labels. We'll get more into real-world labels in a moment, but let's take an example here of me setting variable 1 to 1. So I know this command is VMC1 equals 1, and normally a timeline or external device would set this. But for the purpose of this training video, note that we can set variable 1 to 1, and that is shown up here because we are monitoring the variables through this checkbox. We'll come back to loading the files, but know that you can also view these as hex if required. Under card tools, we can do a number of things. We can list files on the card. We can send a single file. So this would be the root. We can send to the root, send to the shows folder, or send to the audio folder. There is not currently a retrieve from card available in Configurator. You would have to do this through a Windows PC. You can also send a complete directory from a computer. You can also delete all the files, or you can format the card. One unique feature is that we can load the control.ini from the card. We can bring that back over as a text file and save a local copy on my Windows desktop. I can make any edits that I would need on the left-hand side here and make those changes and push them back up to the right-hand side. I can also erase from the device. I can load and save locally to the computer that I'm working from. So let's take a look at editing variable labels directly in Configurator. Now, a lot of people do choose to push the variables directly from a CSV file onto the card. This allows them to edit in Excel or a structured text editor. However, we can do this directly in Configurator. So I'm going to go ahead and label any of my variables here. So popcorn machine, nachos, show start, and e-stop, all the essentials. So if I go to push this up, it is going to force me to save a local copy, which I'll save on my desktop, and the file should be sent successfully. Now note that it will not actually successfully send unless you see it here both on the read-only and on the local configuration. Now, if I were to change this on the device, I could of course get from the device by hitting load. So I went and refresh that, and I could push that back over and save a local copy. Now if I go back to my variables tab and I load and monitor, notice that it says what the actual variable title for that number is. And so this is a lot easier to troubleshoot, as well as gives us portability across platforms and programming interfaces. So we can do the same with the control.ini that we can do with the variable labels and just edit those, push them up, pull them down. It's the one thing where we can get a configuration from the device, save it locally for archiving purposes, and of course make those changes and push it back up. All of these card tools do require firmware version 2.53 or greater, or a third generation device such as an LX2 or a Pro Commander 3. The next thing we want to look at here is the Inputs and Outputs tab. Once again, this scales specific to the device I'm working on. So in a Pro Commander ES would have 8 inputs and 8 outputs and no analog or servo values. If I scroll down here, I'll see that I have those servo values below, but we're going to take a look at the inputs first. So what I'm doing on the back of my device is I'm connecting pin 9 with pin 1 on the remote 1 through 8 Phoenix connector. I can go down the line here and do 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, and all I'm doing is selecting those to light up as inputs by connecting and shorting that wire to the built-in voltage. Now, I can also bring my own voltage by connecting any external voltage to pin 9 to reference the power supply or power source that I am connecting to. And of course, I can connect those discrete inputs to 1 through 8 respectively. However, assuming you don't have an external input voltage, you can just simply connect as a dry contact pins 9 and of course pins 1 through 8. Those are the inputs. Now on the output side, any of the outputs that I want to turn on as a test and adjust, I can just simply click and release. Those will latch on and give me that display on the front message panel of my device for verification. Analogs are a little bit different. Analogs not only can set the value, but they can be inverted. So that means that 0 to 100 would be 100 to 0, or we can set a min and max. Note that there is a send values checkbox for safety here, so that, for example, if my move needs to start at 50%, I want to move that slider into 50% first before checking the send values. Now, if I want 50% to be my safe minimum due to a mechanical issue, I can hit 5,000 on set minimum, and I can go up here to 8,500 or 85% and set maximum. Now, my minimum, or 0%, is 5,000, and my maximum is 10,000. This gives me the ability to scale this output to a relative 12-bit value. Now, if I want to invert this, again, that will invert it at the hardware level, meaning that both in Configurator and in Conductor, ShowForge, or VenueMagic, I don't have to worry about inverting that 0 to 100. It is a hard invert value if we do have to change something mechanically at the figure. So let's say I want to reset this. I can stretch this back out, click at 10,000, click at 0, and now I'm back to a full 0 to 100% or 0 to 10 volts on analog. Down at servo level, this is the same thing. This servo would be 1 through 4, and this would give me the ability to set both minimum and maximum values. Note that if we are using one of the advanced RS-485 driver modes, that the analog outputs here would also command those motors through the RS-485. That is done in parallel with the onboard connections of the 0 to 10 and the servo outputs. Under the SMPTE tab, SMPTE timecode can be brought in from a Pro Commander 2 or better. Note that the Pro Commander 2 does require additional hardware, whereas the PHX, LX, and LTC would automatically have that built in as an RCA or XLR connection. Additional timecode options are available within the software programs that can utilize them, but this gives me the ability to monitor and check that timecode is coming in. Now let's look at the DMX Controls tab. By default, the DMX merger is set to none. All Pro Commander 2 or better devices have a DMX input on the back of the device. With the DMX input set to none, only basic logic commands can be processed. You must select LTP, HTP, change, add, combine, or show priority to bring DMX into the unit for any other reason. Please note that on the Pro Commander, LTP does stand for lowest takes precedence, with change, combine, and show priority more traditional to the DMX lighting standards. You can specify a start and end channel to limit the range of the DMX input merger. DMX mapping is a very unique feature on the Pro Commander, which allows both analog, digital, and ease-in values to be captured from a DMX channel. For example, if the analog start value was set to 4 and the DMX digital start channel value was set to 15, this means that analog channels 4 through 8 on the DMX range would map to analog channels 1 through 4 on the back of the Pro Commander. The same for the digital start channels, that if 15 was the DMX value coming in as the start, 15 through whatever 15 plus 16 is, hold please, 15 plus 16, yes, I had to use a calculator, so 15 through 31 would be the 16 digital channels on the Pro Commander, and of course we have a timeout and ease-in trigger. If the ease-in trigger was set to 1 and rose above 50%, that would trigger an ease-in. When it fell below 50% again, another ease-in would be triggered, allowing DMX to trigger the ease-in rather than the show data. DMX frame rate defaults to the US ITT standard of 44, but can be modified to match legacy motion control systems. DMX byte delay is an excellent resource for lower-priced DMX fixtures which may not have the full range of the byte delay and frame rate required. Raising this may affect the flicker and the smoothness of an LED fade time. And of course, there's some basic DMX sliders below. If I need to just test DMX channel 5, this is the fastest way within Configurator to do so. Now let's look at the Pro I/O routing. Each Pro Commander has a lookup table for the Pro I/Os that are connected between addresses 1 and 32. Similar to the Pro I/O digital daisy chain via WebNet, each of the Pro I/Os can have a unique address for either daisy chain or direct connection. If I hit load value, they're all set by default to 255 times 4. This is the broadcast default, and that means that all Pro I/O addresses 1 through 32 are broadcasting to all IP addresses within the range of the subnet that is listed. That means that every address between 10.00.100 and 10.00.255 would be receiving the commands for these Pro I/Os. As you can imagine, that's a lot of network traffic. Now let's say we had 3 Pro I/Os and a Pro Commander connected to a gigabit switch, and there was no other inside or outside traffic on this network. Not such a big deal, however, there is a lot of extra overhead. What this allows us to do is to set an individual IP to a specific range within our subnet. So if I did 102 as the value for Pro I/O 1, now this specific Pro I/O at address 1 is only going to be sending data from the Pro Commander to the Pro I/O on this IP address. That's 10.00.102. I can also set a range to get this back to 255, again, which is the broadcast. And that's setting all addresses to 255 to set that back. Now, if you're on a large network, a corporate network, behind managed switches or VLANs, it is very highly recommended that each Pro I/O has a specific IP address. So let's take one more look at how the Pro I/Os can connect to the Pro Commander. In smaller installations, particularly those using digital animation, we do allow a daisy chain WebNet over RS-485. The baud rates must match, and we do provide tools to help you set that up. To recap, those were in here under the daisy chain mode and the daisy chain baud rate. All the WebNet address or all the WebNet ports must be set to the same baud rate in order for this to work. Additionally, the IP or the Pro I/O net address, the A1, A2, and A3, must be uniquely set to have that address reflect in Conductor Pro, Venue Magic, or ShowForge. Also note that if you're using WebNet, there is no bidirectional communication, and within these programs, many of these tests and adjustabilities are disabled. We do recommend, wherever possible, using a gigabit network switch and IP-specific addressing for the Pro I/Os within Configurator on the Pro Commander of your choice. For more information, please look at the wiring diagrams for any of the Pro Commanders or Pro I/O devices to better understand this Pro I/O routing. Every Weigl device shipped from the factory defaults to broadcast messaging on 255x4 across all 32 of the or the ProIO WEMNet addresses. And finally, there is a Show Controls tab. The Show Controls tab is basically a replication of the GSL command, that's get show list, and GSS for get show status. Those can be used by just invoking the buttons here for get show list and get show status. As you can see, there is no show or no card in this unit currently. However, I could start a show based on the show number and pressing this button. Finally, Weigl Configurator for PC ships with a target configuration window. All of the targets that would be connected to the Pro Commander would show up in this window. If we have any target signaling devices, that's a wand, these signaling devices will show up in here and allow additional configuration. Of course, we can monitor the hits coming in from the Pro Commander from the actual targeting or signaling devices. Auto address and scan targets, of course, are supported in this PC configuration for the target system. For more information on the Prism Tag RGB system, please visit faq.weigl.support. This concludes the basic overview for Weigl Hardware Configurator for PC. For more information, please visit faq.weigl.support.